Right now, you can walk into a shop and pick from 40 kinds of water. Still, sparkling, alkaline, spring, glacier. Water sold with a photo of a mountain it has never actually touched. You choose one in about 3 seconds, mostly by the label. Then you carry it home past a tap that was already pouring something perfectly safe, and you drink neither because your phone buzzed. That picky, slightly ridiculous relationship with water is brand new. For almost the entire human story, nobody got to be picky. Your ancestors knelt beside rivers, springs, warm green pools, puddles sitting in animal tracks, and the occasional tree hollow a frog had already claimed. No filter, no chlorine, no little label promising it wouldn't end you. Just a person, a questionable source, and a choice that could go very, very wrong. So how did they survive? Not the way people like to imagine. Their stomachs were not magical, their immune systems were not indestructible, and no, they did not all quietly replace water with beer. Here is the honest version. They got sick. Many of them died, especially the children. But the ones who made it were doing something we almost never do anymore. They read water. They studied it the way you study a text message from someone you don't trust. And that skill, passed from mouth to ear for thousands of years, is the reason you exist to be annoyed by 40 kinds of bottled water today. Let's start with why water was never optional in the first place. Your body treats water as non-negotiable. It moves nutrients, cools you down, cushions your joints, runs your digestion, and keeps your blood from turning into something closer to syrup. You can last weeks without food in the right conditions. Without water, serious trouble arrives in days. So your ancestors did not wander at random hoping a lake would appear before dinner. Their whole lives bent around water. Where it was, where it wasn't, how far to the next sure thing. And part of the problem was a trick your own body plays on you. Humans are, frankly, spectacular sweaters. In 2004, in the journal Nature, biologists Daniel Lieberman and Dennis Bramble laid out the case that our bodies were shaped for endurance. Long, patient movement across hot ground. The kind of walking and running that lets a slow, weak primate chase faster animals until the animal simply overheats and gives up. Sweat is what made that possible. Sweat is also a subscription service you cannot cancel. Every hour under the sun, you leak the exact thing you need most. Evolution handed us a brilliant cooling system and then quietly mailed us the bill. Food helped a little. Fruit, roots, leaves, meat, blood, and organs all carry moisture, and in some places that covered a real share of the day's water. But a juicy tuber is a snack, not a reservoir. Food bought time. It did not cancel the trip to the water's edge. The real technology was in the head. Here's where it gets interesting. Before humans had a single pot or pipe, they had memory. The oldest members of a group were walking maps. They remembered which spring kept running when everything else dried up, where rain pooled in a hollow rock, which bend in the river went still and foul in late summer, and how far the next safe source really was. That knowledge wasn't gossip. It was infrastructure, stored not in stone, but in people. Lose the elder who remembered the dry season spring, and you could lose the group. They organized their lives around that map too. Camps often sat within reach of water, but not right on top of it. Sit directly on the good water, and you also sit with the insects, the predators who know animals come there to drink, the floods, and the mess every other creature leaves behind. Better to visit, collect, and pull back to higher, drier ground. So the first piece of water tech was not a bucket. It was a decision about where to stand. Knowing where to go was the whole game. Then came the harder question. You've found water. Is it going to hydrate you, or start a deeply personal argument with your insides? Nobody in the ancient world knew about bacteria or parasites. No one knelt by a pond muttering about pathogen counts, but they could read patterns, and nature is brutally good at teaching through consequences. Moving water usually beats still water. A spring coming straight out of rock was a safer bet than a shallow puddle sitting in the sun that every thirsty animal in the region had already visited. Clear didn't guarantee safe, and muddy didn't guarantee deadly, but the look, the smell, the taste, the temperature, and the place all gave you clues. Animals gave clues too. Follow their trails, and they often lead to hidden springs and seasonal pools. Not a perfect safety system. A gazelle can happily drink from something that would send your gut into a week-long crisis of faith, but in dry country, the animals show you where the water even is. Plants were a map as well, a patch that stayed stubbornly green in the dry season. Clusters of moisture-loving plants. A swarm of insects. Birds gathering at dusk. All of it hinted at water below. People dug into dry stream beds where water had run recently, and waited. The first scoop looked like soup. Let it settle, and the top layer became something you could almost respect. Dew-off leaves. Rain caught in rock hollows. Melted snow. Coastal groups pulled moisture from shellfish. Desert groups memorized which roots held water underground like living canteens. None of this made water safe. It made the odds better, and the odds improved through the most human process there is. Someone drank from the shaded spring and stayed fine. Someone else drank downstream from a dead animal and spent 2 days rethinking every choice that led them there. Both of those became information. We are unmatched at turning one person's misery into everyone's rulebook. Stories, warnings, habits, taboos. Don't drink there after heavy rain. Don't camp by that pool late in the dry season. Let the mud settle. Take it from upstream. That was water treatment before anyone knew what they were treating, not cleaning the source. Reading it, testing it, remembering it, and teaching the next person which mistakes they could skip. Then humans stopped chasing water and started demanding it. Here's the part nobody tells you. Some of the oldest wooden structures ever built by humans aren't temples or homes. They're wells. In 2012, in the journal PLOS1, a team led by Willy Tegel and Dietrich Hakelberg described 4 water wells built by early farming communities near Leipzig, in eastern Germany, and dated the oak timbers to somewhere between roughly 5400 and 5100 BC. That's more than 7,000 years ago. And these weren't panic holes scraped into the mud. They're builders-shaped oak with nothing but stone tools, notched the corners together like careful joinery, and sank the whole structure down to reach groundwater. A well changes everything. Surface water is exposed. Animals drink from it, waste washes in, the sun cooks it, and a drought shrinks it into a concentrated puddle of mud and regret. Groundwater has usually filtered down through soil, sand, and rock that strips out some of the junk. Not all of it. A crystal-clear well can still hide something that will ruin your week. But compared to an open pool beside a crowded village, a protected well was steadier and more yours. And building one took far more than being thirsty. You had to guess where groundwater hid, gather the labor, haul out tons of soil, keep the shaft from collapsing on the diggers, shape wood precisely, and maintain the thing for years. The earliest wells weren't holes. They were group projects. They also show how staying put made the water problem worse, not better. Wandering hunter-gatherers could just leave when a source went bad. Farmers had fields, stored grain, houses, animals, and neighbors who had apparently decided to live here forever. Once you've built a village, moving every time the stream turns unpleasant is a terrible plan. So reliable water became part of the architecture. It decided where villages could grow and how many people the land could hold. The puddle had become a public utility. Now, the question everyone actually wants answered. Did they deliberately clean water before drinking it? Here's the honest answer. We mostly don't know. They had the tools. Humans controlled fire long before pottery, and later groups heated liquid by dropping fire-hot stones into it. Drop enough hot stones and you can bring water to a boil. But proving someone boiled water on purpose to kill something they couldn't see is nearly impossible. Boiling leaves almost no trace. A hearth proves a fire, a cracked stone proves heating. None of it comes stamped, emergency drinking water, because the stream looked medically adventurous. People probably heated water to cook, soften food, render fat, make medicine, brew broth, and any drop in disease may have started as a lucky side effect nobody planned. Same problem with straining water through cloth, sand, grass, or charcoal. It pulls out bugs and mud and makes the water clearer. But clearer is not the same as safe. A homemade filter can fix the texture while leaving the truly ambitious organisms completely untouched. And that stronger immune system idea? Partly real, mostly oversold. Repeated exposure could build some local immunity, and their guts and childhoods were nothing like ours. But that was not armor. Bad water still meant diarrhea, parasites, dehydration, and death, and it fell hardest on kids. Ancient cemeteries are not a wellness trend. As for the beer myth, no. Brewing does heat and ferment, which reduces some risk, but beer needs grain, labor, containers, and usually water to begin with. A mobile Ice Age group was not hauling a keg across the grassland. Here's where it gets bigger than survival. Once water was dependable, it stopped being something you drank and became something a whole society arranged itself around. Someone had to dig the well, someone had to keep the walls from crumbling. Someone had to decide who drinks first when the level drops, and someone always stood nearby, explaining that the shortage was clearly the last leader's fault. Fountains and wells turned into the places people met, traded news, arranged marriages, and waited behind the one person who brought 9 containers. Water even went sacred. Springs and rivers became homes of gods, sites of healing and purification. That sounds like pure superstition until you notice what it did. A sacred spring was also a protected spring. Ritual rules controlled who came near it, when, and what you were forbidden to do beside it. Religion, in a lot of places, was environmental management with better storytelling. Then medicine stepped in. Ancient Greek healers didn't know about microbes, but they knew water changed with its source, its season, its smell, and its taste. They let it settle. They strained it. The Hippocratic sleeve, a cloth bag tied to the medical tradition of Hippocrates around the 5th century BC, was made to strain boiled water clean of what you could see. Not a modern purifier, but a real shift in thinking. People had stopped only choosing water. They'd started judging it and changing it. Big states pushed it all the way. Aqueducts, pipes, drains, public fountains, baths, sewers. In Rome around the year 97, a former general named Sextus Julius Frontinus was put in charge of the city's water supply and wrote an entire report on its channels and their upkeep. Impressive, and still leaky, still uneven, still capable of poisoning people through bad maintenance and lead. These systems didn't defeat waterborne disease, but they turned scattered folk knowledge about mud and springs and rain into shared, engineered infrastructure. Clean water was never simply discovered. It was argued over, built, blessed, and defended. Which brings us back to that shop and the 40 labels. Today, clean water shows up so quietly you only notice it when it stops. You turn a handle, and centuries of engineering pour into a glass. Protected reservoirs, treatment plants, pumps, testing, filtration, and whole careers spent making sure your morning coffee doesn't become a medical event. It feels automatic because civilization hid the work. Your ancestors had no such illusion. To them, water was a relationship with a landscape that could turn on them. A spring could fail, a pool could spoil, a river could flood, or carry something foul from upstream. Survival ran on attention, remembering the seasons, reading the plants, following the animals, tasting with care, digging with patience, and listening when an older voice said, quietly, "Not that one." Picture 2 people for a second. A Neolithic elder standing over a spring, pointing, telling a younger one which water keeps you alive and which water lies to you. And a water engineer today, checking a reading on a screen before millions of strangers pour a glass they will never think about. 7,000 years apart, same exact job. Keep the people alive by remembering what water really does. Almost everything changed between those 2 hands. That one thread never broke. They weren't healthier than us. They weren't secretly immune. Plenty of them got sick, and plenty of their children didn't grow up. Their real victory was that enough people learned and refused to let the lesson die. They turned pain into warnings, warnings into customs, customs into wells and cloth and cisterns, and all of it into the quiet expectation you carry right now. That a glass of water should not contain anything with its own reproductive plans. So the next time you stand in that aisle, judging a bottle by the mountain on the label, remember what you're really holding, not just water. 10,000 years of people kneeling by muddy pools, choosing the least terrible option, and remembering hard enough to pass it on. Your ancestors read the water to survive. You just read the label. Here's my question for you. If you were dropped into that world tomorrow, with no filter and no map, do you honestly think you'd know which water to trust? Or would you be the cautionary tale the elders warned the next group about? Tell me in the comments. And if you made it this far, you already read water better than you think.